Clara, after 15 years with TechCore, we've decided to restructure your position, Allison Bennett announced, her voice betraying a faint satisfaction. She sat opposite me in the small conference room, flanked by Rebecca, from HR. Both wore perfectly rehearsed expressions of corporate regret, like actors delivering lines they'd memorized but didn't believe. The company is shifting in a new direction, Rebecca added, sliding a thick manila envelope across the table. Your contributions have been valuable, but we're consolidating the tech division under the new product strategy team. I nodded without opening the envelope, allowing the sound of the paper crinkling to fill the silence. The usual severance package, I thought. 2 weeks for every year of service, a few months of health benefits, and a list of career counseling services I would never use. The familiar hollow offering that came with the finality of corporate decisions. I completely understand, I replied calmly, my voice even. These decisions are never easy. Relief flashed across their faces, but it was brief. They had expected the tearful, defensive reaction. The outburst. The anger. What they didn't expect was a 52-year-old woman sitting across from them with an air of quiet acceptance, someone who had seen this coming for weeks. After all, when an accidental email thread appeared in my inbox last month, it hadn't taken long to connect the dots. Allison seemed to grow more comfortable with my response, perhaps misinterpreting it as compliance. We'd like you to clear your desk by Friday, she continued, gaining momentum. We'll need your keycard, company laptop, and phone before you leave. I rose slowly from my chair, taking a moment to collect my thoughts. Of course, I said, my tone neutral, but my mind was already elsewhere. My team, the 6 engineers I had handpicked and mentored over the years, would be notified this afternoon. The same team that had helped me create the revolutionary algorithm now powering TechCore's flagship product. But that was something neither Allison nor Rebecca had considered. Is there anything else? I asked, my voice still steady, keeping them off balance. They exchanged a look, clearly thrown by my composure. Allison was the first to recover, her corporate mask snapping back into place. That's all for now. Thank you for making this a professional transition. As I turned to leave the room, I passed the glass walls of the executive suite. Through the transparent barrier, I caught a glimpse of CEO Thomas Caldwell gesturing passionately at a PowerPoint presentation titled Q3 Revenue Projections. The same Thomas Caldwell who had taken full credit for my algorithm at last year's industry conference, mentioning me only as a valued member of the research team with no acknowledgement of my contribution. The irony was almost unbearable. I closed my office door behind me and pulled out my phone. One text message. It was time. It's happening, I typed, hitting send. Within moments, the response flashed back, perfect timing. Contracts are ready. Dinner tonight to finalize details. I smiled faintly and glanced at my calendar. Today was Wednesday. Friday, I would walk out of TechCore for the last time. And Monday? Monday would be the beginning of something entirely different. I sat there for a moment after they left, the weight of the conversation settling in. The hum of the fluorescent lights above, the soft ticking of the clock on the wall, everything seemed to slow down as I processed the reality of what had just transpired. This wasn't just a job loss. It was something far deeper. A lifetime of dedication, my blood, sweat, and tears poured into TechCore, reduced to a couple of lines on a severance notice. It stung, but not in the way they thought it would. Not in the way they expected. I had seen the writing on the wall for weeks now. That email thread was all the confirmation I needed. I could feel the shift long before I was called into that meeting. I had been the one to develop the core technology that powered TechCore's leading product, the algorithm that drove billions in revenue. Yet, somehow, it was always someone else's credit, always someone else's spotlight. I had always been in the background, pushing the boundaries of technology, only for my work to be repackaged and presented as someone else's triumph. But as I sat in my now empty office, surrounded by the remnants of my career, photos from conferences, awards I had earned for my contributions, a half-empty coffee cup I'd gotten from my team last year, it hit me, they never valued what I brought to the table. I wasn't just a cog in the machine to them. I was disposable. But that was about to change. Before I share what happened next, the moment that left an entire room of journalists in stunned silence, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, hit that like button, because this story is just getting started. I stood up slowly and walked over to my desk, touching the corners of the framed team photos, the ones of us celebrating our algorithm's success. There was a moment of silence, not of sadness, but of realization. TechCore had underestimated me. They thought I would crumble, that I would take my severance, pack my things, and disappear quietly. But I had a plan. A plan that would leave them reeling, and it started with one small text. I pulled out my phone and typed the words, "It's happening." The response came almost instantly, perfect timing. "Contracts are ready. Dinner tonight to finalize details." I had known, deep down, that this day would come. The day I would no longer be silenced. The day I would reclaim my worth, not just for myself, but for the incredible team I had built, and for the years of work that had gone unnoticed. And as I walked out of TechCore's building for the final time, I wasn't looking back in regret. I was looking ahead, to what was next, the beginning of something far bigger than what I had left behind. Stay tuned. The next few days passed in a blur of routine. I went through the motions of clearing my desk, signing the necessary paperwork, and tying up loose ends, but my mind was elsewhere. I had already mapped out my next move. TechCore had underestimated the most important thing. They had no idea how much more I was capable of when I wasn't confined by their narrow vision. That evening, I met with James at a quiet restaurant far from the reach of anyone from the industry. He was the CEO of Meridian Tech, a rival company with a keen eye for talent and a knack for discretion. James had always respected my work, and over the years, we'd exchanged ideas and built a mutual trust. He was the perfect person to help me turn this setback into the opportunity of a lifetime. As we settled into a private alcove in the back of the restaurant, away from prying eyes, James looked at me with a knowing smile. "So, they actually did it, huh?" he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "I knew it was coming, but I didn't expect them to cut you loose, especially after everything you've done for them." I met his gaze, a faint smile on my lips. They never understood what I really brought to the table. They saw the end product, the algorithm, but not the underlying structure. They didn't care about the core of what made it work, just the results. James nodded, clearly seeing the same picture. "Well, you've got the patent now, right?" I took a slow sip of water, leaning back in my chair as I considered his question. "I do. And it's not just any patent. It's the key to everything." "They didn't file it." "I did, on my own time, with my own resources. I filed for it last month, and it's already been granted. A 43% increase in efficiency, all my improvements, not theirs." James raised an eyebrow, impressed. "That's bold." "I'm impressed, Clara. You're playing this perfectly." The conversation shifted as we finalized the details of the contract. Meridian Tech was ready to acquire the exclusive licensing rights to my algorithm, ensuring that TechCore couldn't even touch it without coming to us. The deal was ready to go, and once signed, I would step into a new leadership role, not just as an inventor, but as the Chief Innovation Officer for a company that truly recognized my worth. I smiled, the weight of the decision settling comfortably on my shoulders. This was no longer about vengeance, it was about recognition. It was about finally taking control of my work, my future, and my legacy. As we finished dinner and discussed the final terms, I couldn't help but feel the first spark of excitement. This was the beginning of something huge, something that TechCore had never imagined. And by the time they realized what had happened, it would be far too late. As we left the restaurant, James slapped me on the back with a grin. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. "To owning your value," I replied, clinking my glass against his. The next few days would be critical. Monday would be my first day in my new role, and I could already feel the rush of possibility. TechCore had underestimated me. But now, they would see what it looked like when someone who truly understood the value of innovation was in charge. By the time Monday rolled around, I had already settled into my new office at Meridian Tech, a sleek, modern space that stood in sharp contrast to the sterile walls of TechCore. The energy was different here, alive, buzzing with the possibility of innovation. My team was eager, full of ideas and enthusiasm, each of them grateful for the opportunity to finally be led by someone who truly understood their value. And I was more than ready. Meanwhile, back at TechCore, things were unraveling. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, even from the other side of the city. The first signs were subtle, whispers in the industry, a few murmurs about the sudden departure of their key engineer. But soon, the fallout became impossible to ignore. TechCore stock, once riding high on the success of AccountCore, took a sharp dive. The company's once immovable position in the market now seemed shaky, fragile. The executives, including Thomas Caldwell, were scrambling. I could practically hear their panic through the phone calls and urgent emails that flooded my inbox. They hadn't expected the storm that was about to hit them. But I had. And I had planned for it with precision. As I sat in my new office, reviewing the latest developments with my team, I couldn't help but feel a sense of calm. I had won the first round, my patent was mine, and TechCore's attempts to ignore me had only made my victory sweeter. Now, it was time to see how they would react when they realized just how badly they'd miscalculated. The calls started coming in shortly after. First from legal teams trying to make sense of what had happened. Then from investors, their concerns about the company's stability mounting by the minute. The whispers in the industry grew louder, and the media began to pick up on the story. TechCore's innovation crisis. Is the company losing its edge? But it wasn't just the investors who were panicking. As my former team members, now safely settled at Meridian, began to settle into their new roles, I could see how badly TechCore had underestimated the impact of my departure. My work had been the backbone of their most successful product, and now, without access to the patent, they were left scrambling for a solution. I smiled to myself as I reviewed the first licensing offers that came in. It was only a matter of time before they would have to make a choice, negotiate with us for the rights to the algorithm, or risk losing everything they had built on the foundation I had created. Either way, it was a win for me. And more importantly, for my team, my brilliant engineers, the ones who had stood by me through it all. By Wednesday, the situation had escalated to a full-blown crisis. The board at TechCore called an emergency meeting, trying to make sense of their growing disaster. Their solution? To recreate my algorithm from scratch. It was laughable. The same algorithm that had taken me years to perfect, years of countless late nights, testing, refining, failing, and succeeding, was not something they could simply replicate in a few months. As I spoke with James later that afternoon, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction. "They're done for," he said, his voice full of disbelief and admiration. "You've put them in a position where they either have to pay you a fortune for the rights to your work, or they rebuild everything from the ground up. Either way, they lose." I nodded, feeling the weight of it all settle over me. This wasn't about getting back at them. This was about something far bigger, proving my worth, showing the world that innovation couldn't be ignored or taken for granted. TechCore had thought they could push me out and steal my work. Instead, they had given me the perfect opportunity to reclaim everything that was rightfully mine. The media continued to buzz, and by Friday, the cracks in TechCore's armor were wide enough for everyone to see. Their stock continued to plummet, investors were growing nervous, and the company was facing mounting pressure from every side. But I was sitting comfortably at the head of my new team, watching it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. I had orchestrated this perfectly. In the weeks that followed, I was no longer the invisible engineer behind the scenes. I was the face of innovation, the creator of the technology that was revolutionizing industries. And TechCore? They were left to pick up the pieces, scrambling to save face, while I soared ahead, my future now entirely in my hands. Clara's triumph wasn't just about career success, it was about proving that real value, real innovation, could never be ignored forever. It didn't take long for TechCore to realize the gravity of their mistake. They had tried to move on, to act as though my departure hadn't shaken their foundation. But the cracks were widening. By the time I was settling into my new role as Chief Innovation Officer at Meridian Tech, the phone calls started. The first one came in a few days after the press release went live. It was from a blocked number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. When I picked up, the voice on the other end was frantic, almost desperate. "Kira, it's Thomas. We need to talk," the CEO of TechCore said, his usual confidence now replaced with an edge of panic. "There's been a misunderstanding. Please, let's discuss this. We can work something out." I didn't respond immediately, letting the silence hang in the air for a beat too long. Finally, I spoke, my tone even, almost too calm. "I'm listening," I said, leaning back in my chair as I stared out at the view from my office. It was a clear day, the skyline stretching before me like an open road. I had never felt more in control of my future. "Look, TechCore, is in a position we never thought we'd be in," Thomas continued, his voice trailing off as though he wasn't sure how to continue. "We'd like to open a dialogue about the algorithm. We can settle this, fairly." I could almost hear him gulp, trying to regain his composure. I knew what he was doing, trying to make me feel like the magnanimous one, trying to make me think they were giving me a chance to make things right. The same people who had pushed me out now needed me. How quickly things had changed. "You want to negotiate?" I asked, my voice deliberately cool. "Well, I suppose we can discuss the terms. But just to be clear, this isn't about settling. This is about securing the rights to something that was never yours to claim in the first place." Silence followed, heavier than before. I could feel the tension building on the other end of the line, the realization dawning on him that this was no longer just a matter of corporate maneuvering. It was a battle for ownership, for control, and he was losing. "I'm happy to discuss licensing terms," I added, watching my reflection in the glass as the words left my mouth. "But any further discussions will be through my legal team. We've been prepared for this." And with that, I ended the call. I didn't need to say more. The message had been clear. TechCore had spent too long relying on others to build their empire, to take credit for what others had created. But now, the tables had turned. As the days passed, TechCore's attempts to mend the rift continued, but I was unmoved. They sent a flurry of emails, drafted proposals, tried to reach me through every possible channel. But all I could think of was how quickly their desperation had become apparent. They had thought they could discard me like an old piece of equipment, but now they needed what I had created, something I had given them, yes, but something I had built, refined, and made my own. Meanwhile, at Meridian, things were progressing smoothly. The engineering team was already implementing improvements to my algorithm, pushing its capabilities to new heights. I was no longer just a behind-the-scenes engineer, I was shaping the future of the company, of the industry itself. And TechCore? They were left in the dust, scrambling to hold on to a legacy that wasn't theirs to claim. Late one evening, I received another call. This time, it was from Rebecca, the former HR head. Her voice, usually so composed, was now tinged with something else. Maybe regret. Or fear. "Kira," she began, her words rushed, "we need to talk. TechCore wants to arrange a meeting, to discuss the possibility of a partnership, a fair licensing agreement. They're willing to acknowledge your role as the inventor, Anne." I interrupted her, my patience thinning. "You're asking me to give you something you never deserved, and you want me to consider it a fair agreement?" The silence was deafening, her hesitation obvious. Finally, she spoke. "We're ready to make things right," she said, almost pleading. "Too little, too late," I replied coldly. "If you truly wanted to make things right, you would have recognized my work long before now. You should have acknowledged me, valued me, not thrown me away like a discarded asset. Now, you'll pay the price. And with that, I hung up. TechCore's final plea had been nothing more than a desperate attempt to salvage what little they could. But it wasn't just the algorithm they were losing, it was their credibility, their reputation. They had made a grave mistake, and no amount of pleading could fix it now. As I moved forward, fully in control of my future, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. And TechCore? They were learning the hard way that innovation wasn't something you could discard when it suited you. It was something you had to protect, nurture, and, most importantly, respect. But respect? That was something they would never have again. By the end of the week, the full weight of TechCore's collapse was undeniable. The company, once a towering giant in the tech industry, was now reeling from the aftermath of its own short-sightedness. The media couldn't get enough of the story: the company's fall from grace, the high-profile departure of its chief architect, and the sudden revelation that its most valuable asset had been quietly taken from under its nose. Investors were losing confidence, analysts were writing off their stock, and the industry, once enamored by their success, was now questioning whether TechCore could even survive. As I read through the latest headlines, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about revenge. It was about principle. The principle of acknowledging the people who truly made something happen. For too long, TechCore had treated me like a cog in the machine, a nameless engineer whose contributions could be swept under the rug when it no longer suited their agenda. But now, with the patent in my hands, I had the leverage to make them pay, not just financially, but in a way that would ripple through the industry. By Monday morning, the situation had only worsened. TechCore's board, rattled by the series of missteps that had led to this crisis, had called an emergency session. Rumors were swirling that they were considering a complete overhaul of their leadership. Thomas Caldwell, once seen as the face of the company, was now being questioned in boardrooms across the world. The realization had set in: without access to my algorithm, TechCore's entire business model was on the line. Rebuilding the technology from scratch was an option, but one that would cost millions and take years to complete. The alternative? They'd have to pay exorbitantly for licensing rights, further exacerbating their financial troubles. And then, the phone rang again. This time, it was from Victor Lawson, the head of TechCore's legal department, a man who had always seen me as little more than a footnote in their success story. His voice was strained, his words clipped as he tried to maintain the last shred of professionalism. "Kira," he began, the weight of the situation clear in his tone, "we need to talk. We'd like to negotiate a licensing agreement. TechCore is willing to acknowledge your role as the inventor and come to terms with what's happened." I leaned back in my chair, letting his words hang in the air. Negotiating? Now they were willing to acknowledge my contributions? It had taken them this long to come to their senses, and now, when they were at their lowest point, they wanted to make amends. I could hear the desperation in his voice, the realization that they had no other option but to bow down to the terms I set. "I think it's too late for that, Victor," I replied calmly. "You had your chance to value my work. Instead, you discarded it, and now, you're paying the price for your oversight. You want to negotiate? Fine. But the terms have changed. And not in your favor." The silence on the other end of the line was palpable, and for a moment, I allowed myself the luxury of enjoying the role reversal. It had been a long time coming. "Let's be clear," I continued, my voice firm, "the licensing fees will be high, and you'll have to acknowledge me publicly as the creator of the technology. If you're not willing to do that, then we'll see how long your company survives without it." There was another long pause before he responded, his words tight. "We'll discuss it with the board." As I hung up, I felt a strange sense of closure. TechCore was no longer in control. The power had shifted, and I was the one holding the cards. In the days that followed, the company's downward spiral accelerated. Investors were abandoning ship, the board was facing mounting pressure, and the legal team was scrambling to come up with a solution. By the time they reached out to me again, it was clear that they were willing to pay whatever it took to secure the licensing rights to the algorithm. But the terms would remain harsh, and TechCore's reputation would be forever tarnished by their failure to protect what was rightfully mine. As I signed the final agreements with Meridian Tech, securing my place as the leader of the next wave of innovation, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come. The industry that had once written me off was now looking to me for guidance, for leadership, for vision. And TechCore? They were left to pick up the pieces of a company that had built its success on the backs of people like me, only to throw them away when it was convenient. The press release went live just hours after the final deal was signed. I was no longer just an engineer in the background. I was the face of a new era in technology. And TechCore? They had learned the hard way that innovation, like respect, cannot be taken for granted. By the time the dust settled, TechCore had become the cautionary tale everyone in the industry now spoke of, how even giants could fall when they failed to recognize the true value of those who built them. Meanwhile, I was stepping into a new chapter, one where my voice would be heard, my ideas would be valued, and my work would finally be recognized for what it was, groundbreaking. And nothing, not even the mistakes of my former company, could take that away from me. As TechCore's downfall continued to unfold, the weight of their poor decisions became more apparent with each passing day. The company's stock, once a stable titan in the tech world, plummeted at an alarming rate. Investors, once loyal to the brand, were scrambling to sell off their shares, sending the company into a financial tailspin. Analysts were no longer writing about the next big thing for TechCore. Instead, headlines were filled with phrases like unprecedented crisis and industry downfall. The company's public image, built over years of success, was now in tatters, and it was clear that no amount of corporate jargon or polished press releases could save them from the damage that had been done. The most devastating blow came when it was revealed that TechCore's flagship product, once heralded as the future of the industry, was now crippled without the algorithm that I had developed. The executives had always underestimated the true power of the technology one had created, focusing solely on the flashy user interface and marketing pitch that they could sell to clients. But they had never understood the intricate design of the algorithm, its genius, its capacity for scalability, the very foundation that kept their product running. Now, as they scrambled to salvage their product, they faced the grim reality: rebuilding from scratch wasn't an option. In a panic, they started calling in the best engineers, throwing money at them in a desperate bid to recreate what I had perfected over years of tireless work. But it was like trying to rebuild the foundation of a skyscraper without even understanding the blueprint. Their attempts were doomed from the start. Even if they managed to assemble something close to what I had created, it would take years they didn't have. By the time they could catch up, the industry would have long moved on, and competitors would have already taken over the market. Behind the scenes, I watched it all unfold, my team now thriving under my leadership at Meridian Tech. Every day, we moved closer to the next phase of development, pushing boundaries, developing new features, refining the algorithm, making it even more efficient than before. Meanwhile, TechCore's team was in a constant state of confusion, their leadership scrambling to keep the company afloat. The executives, including Thomas Caldwell, had gone from being corporate giants to desperately trying to salvage whatever fragments of credibility they could. Board members were in full-blown panic mode, calling emergency meetings at all hours, seeking a way out of the mess they had created. But the damage was done, and no quick fix would change that. The ultimate humiliation came when TechCore's senior legal team reached out, begging me to meet. The once formidable players in the tech world now found themselves at my mercy. They didn't even have the luxury of negotiating from a position of strength. It was laughable. The same legal team that had been so quick to dismiss my intellectual property rights now sought my forgiveness. They had thought they could ride on the coattails of my success, that I would never catch on to their manipulation. But now, they were on their knees, pleading for a lifeline they didn't deserve. "We'll meet your terms," they said, desperation dripping from their voices. "We'll do whatever it takes to fix this, to make it right." But the truth was, there was no fixing it. Even if they managed to secure the licensing deal, they would never regain the trust of their clients or investors. The damage was not just financial, it was reputational, irrevocable. And as they fumbled through their negotiations, trying to secure the licensing terms, I couldn't help but think about how sweet the irony was. They had tried to erase my contributions, to take credit for my work, and now they were faced with the bitter truth that without me, they were nothing. As I moved forward, solidifying my position at Meridian Tech, the calls continued to flood in from industry leaders, investors, and media outlets. Everyone wanted to know my side of the story, wanted to hear how a company that had once been at the top of the tech world had crumbled so spectacularly. And as I spoke about my journey, about how I had taken control of my future and made the choices no one else had the foresight to make, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. TechCore had become the cautionary tale that no one in the industry could ignore. They had been blinded by greed, by the belief that they could keep innovating without recognizing the very people who made their success possible. Now, they were paying the price for that hubris. And I was standing at the forefront of a new era, my success built not on revenge, but on my unwavering belief in my worth, in the value of true innovation. TechCore's collapse wasn't just inevitable, it was deserved. And every day that passed without a resolution from their side only proved how little they had understood about the very technology that had propelled them to success in the first place. Their desperation, their frantic attempts to recover, it was all a testament to how far they had fallen from grace. And I, for one, was determined to make sure that they would never forget who had shown them the way down.